All right, everybody, it's 7:01, and we got a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to get this show on the road. Feel free to grab a seat. If you can't hear me, wave your hands or something. Before we even do introductions, I need to really stress that this was a huge team effort. So aside from the people sitting up here, anyone in the audience who worked on the Swadge, raise your hand and get a round of applause. Beautiful. So with that, we can do some brief introductions up here. My name's Adam. This is my fourth year on Swadge team. It's kind of like a senior thesis project for me at this point. We'll see if I graduate. So this Michael's man over here is...
Hello, I'm Dak. I'm the communications director at MAGFest, and I just sort of, I guess, very loosely oversee the things that go on in this absolutely insane and genius department.
I'm Hunter Dyer. I'm an assistant professor of immersive media at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. I make video games sometimes.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Moriarty. I'm a software engineer, and I've been doing Swadge modes on this project for 3 years now, I believe.
Cool. So let's just dive right into it. Let's start with everyone's favorite technical upgrades. So you may have noticed this year we have a color screen on the front. It's a very visible change on the back. The processor is totally new also. We had to rebuild nearly everything from the ground up in terms of tooling and system firmware and whatnot, which is a lot of fun. But it all starts with the processor, and we chose an ESP32S2. That slide's kind of hard to read, and I apologize. It's the only one that's really text-heavy, and it's the only really good comparison I could find. Yeah, you know it's better because there's big beefy arms on one side of it.
Oh, is that what those are?
Yeah. There's a couple of party guys looking to party, yeah. So the processor is about 1.5 times faster than before. It has double the amount of SRAM. It has double the amount of flash. It has 2 megabytes of SPI-RAM, up from 0, which ended up being tremendously useful. We'll get to that way later. And 3 times the number of GPIOs, a whole bunch of other peripherals, things like RMT, which is actually the worst thing in the world. Don't use it. But also fun things like LED PWM, which is much nicer. And maybe the most important subtle change is that it can do USB as well, which means that these Swadges are programmable now without any sort of external harness or anything. So you can go home as long as you have a USB A to C cable or a C to C cable.
Or B to C cable if you're really crazy.
Or sure, why not? A D to C cable if you're from the future. Yeah, you can mess with them, which is great. But with all this new power and resources, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So the old processor we used was a bare metal platform. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. But what this meant is that there was no operating system in the way. We basically could take full control of everything and get all the performance out of that chip we needed. The new one is not a bare metal platform. Espressif, the company that makes it, has this whole IDF that runs something called FreeRTOS, which is a little RTOS, a little real-time operating system. But little is still not 0. So we had to kind of fight that a little bit. And we mostly fought that by throwing a bunch of stuff in the trash. Because it turns out that Swadges are little game machines, mostly. And the processor was designed as an IoT chip to be in like lights or locks or thermostats or something like that. So one of the, yeah.
Thermostats?
Yeah. Big shout out for heat mode. So a lot of the stuff that was in there was like, how do I connect to a Wi-Fi network? How do I send encrypted packets over various different Wi-Fi schemes and whatnot, or even just TLS and whatever. And we threw all that out. Basically, as much as we could rip out, we ripped out. And there really was not a lot of guidance for this. Kind of had to figure out how to rip out parts but not break the whole system, which we definitely did a couple of times. Fun fact, when you're building your projects with the IDF, there's a folder called components where, hey, stop that. Or put it on mute.
Oh, it does have a mute.
There's mute in the settings. If anyone wants to play their Swadge during the panel, do so. Just put it on mute.
Shout outs to the settings, by the way.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Anyway, oh right, so components. So there's a whole bunch of like system components which come pre-built, but it turns out that if you make a new one with the same name that Espressif provided, yours will overwrite theirs, which wasn't really noted anywhere, but I overrode a whole number of components and basically had them just the bare minimum to compile, and it worked, which is wild. And as I said, we did have to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff. So our development really gets accelerated by using a simulator, which we also call an emulator. And that's based off of Charles, who's sitting in the front row with the very heavy gas mask on. Something called Raw Draw, which is just like a super easy way to take a C program and get a little GUI out of it, graphical user interface. We did also, I just talked about junking a bunch of stuff, but we did use a lot of pre-built components from Espressif as well. Things like the LED component, which was used to pulse width modulate LEDs for different brightness. Who can guess what we used it for? Wrong. That was a trap. It actually drives the buzzer, because it turns out it
Now I can put this back on.
yeah, now you're muted.
Yeah, wait, here we go.
Oh, you're doing the buzzer. Fun real-time demos. In addition to that, we used Circle CI for continuous integration builds. We used GitHub for pretty much everything else, tickets and branches and forks, all general software development stuff. We had to rebuild the asset processor as well, so any sort of sprites have to go through this processor to get packed in a form that's fit for swaging. And hopefully I don't have to do that again for another 4 to 5 years, so we can stick with the same processor, because it's a lot of overhead. All right, so that's like picking the processor and doing some basic tooling. From there, we need to actually start making a thing. So we made a dev kit, and the dev kit looked like this. It was green, it was square, and it was boring. Also, we put everything we could think of on it, and most of it worked. I say most of it because when you plugged it in, there was a vibration motor, which would just buzz uncontrollably. And no. And the amplifier for the microphone got really hot, like you're going to burn yourself hot, which was not good. So a couple of little hack wires later, and it got good enough for some development. It also uses the same edge connector on the bottom. If you can see that the chainsaw Swadge from last year did, so it actually can be programmed with last year's test dock. But we scrapped that on the final one because it turns out having that kind of exposed metal means people touch it, and when people touch those lines, they would tend to glitch, which is bad. We also didn't really check all of our footprints for the parts. So I got this lovely picture from the factory that said, "Can we do it like this? It's the only way that it'll fit." And we said, "Yeah, sure, whatever. It's just for us. But always check your footprints, kids, and then double check it, because no one likes a tilted buzzer." We also had a bunch of different displays that we could pick from. So the dev kit had spots for, I think, 3 different displays. We didn't use any of those. We actually, yeah, we, and by we I mean Charles worked with a company called Ronbo, which no one had ever heard of before, but they're in China and they make great displays.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, did you find him? Dak found him. So we basically ordered the Royal Sampler, one of everything they had under a certain price threshold. And because the dev kit wasn't designed for them, we had to design another board to interface, which is the one on the right. And Charles did that and did some great testing in terms of size and cost and viewability angles and durability and all that. And we picked the screen that we have now with some nice rounded corners.
Love that screen so much.
It's a great screen.
Really great screen.
But supporting this screen comes with its own challenges. So last year, Swadge, you may remember, had a little black and white screen. It was 128 by 64 pixels, and that's the little checkerboard thing. And this year's is a 240 by 280 screen with 16-bit color, and that's the rest of the rectangle. So it's a lot more data to buffer. In fact, the old screen took about a kilobyte to buffer the whole thing, and we ended up double buffering it. The new screen, if we wanted to do a full frame buffer, would be 134 kilobytes, which on a system that only has 320 is about a third of everything, which is just a tremendous number. Too much to work, and also have a bunch of games and stuff on there too. So our solution was to not actually use it in 16-bit color mode. It's actually using 8-bit color. And it's something called the WebSafe palette. Basically, each red, green, and blue channel has 6 different values. So there's 216 colors, and then a couple of special things like transparency and the stuff left over. But that got things down to about 67K for a frame buffer, which was good enough. But you can't just reduce the color and call it a day. You have to think about how you're going to take your images and sprites and whatever and bring it down to an 8-bit color space from 32-bit color, which we're all very much used to at this point. I'll just do this briefly because I had a lot of fun with this one. One of the ways you can sample color is just by looking at each pixel and taking whatever's the closest from your new palette. And if you do that, you get a result that looks like this. It's kind of blobby, there's some banding. It's clearly the right image, but there's a little bit of weirdness to it. And there's actually a better way to go about this, and that's called dithering. Some of you may know this already, so just bear with. But what you do in a nutshell is you take your pixel, you find the closest color, and then you figure out the error, right? Because it's not going to be perfect. There's some amount of error. So you set that pixel, and then the error, you dissipate it to its neighbors. And what this does, when you're calculating the neighbor's pixels, it's the closest color with the error accumulated. And because the error is kind of diffused over a larger space, you end up with something that looks like that, where it's a much smoother transition because the colors are kind of interlaced a little bit. And you can see the difference between the two different sampling methods here. Big difference. And really, it's all just the same palette. The image format we used had that compressed palette, and then it was further compressed using something called heat shrink, which is a compression library specifically for embedded devices, pretty low overhead. We called it WSGs, and it worked. All right, so we've got a new chip, we've got a dev kit, we've got displays, we've got peripherals. How do we go from there to here, which does not look like a rectangle? And the answer was, we asked our team what shapes they liked, and my personal favorite, and the one that I tried to design, which we didn't make, was a party ball. I love Smash. I thought a party ball, like spewing all the components out of it, was going to look great.
Was spewing all over the place.
Yeah. Zing. Yeah, I put it out there, and the team was not super enthused with that, so we moved on to the next. And this was a design put in by Emily Anthony, who's over there. Everyone come out to Bunfest later.
9 p.m. gazebo.
9 p.m. gazebo. And this was a target, because everyone who's played Smash has done break the targets at some point. But we all kind of looked at it and said, it's a target, but it also kind of looks like maybe some other Nintendo property, maybe not this year, so or ever. So we passed on that one. The next design that we kind of messed around with a bit was Dak's design over here. And he said, actually, you do want to?
Oh yeah, I think this was just taking the logo, since this was sort of our 20th anniversary. We were like, well, does it need to be thematic? Because as it turns out, Smash it doesn't have actually a lot of dedicated iconography, because it is by nature a mashup of all of these other IPs. And so we thought, well, maybe we could just kind of make something that is our own thing. But that was also really weird and busy and
yeah.
Like, so, you know.
We tried. We really did.
It all comes back to that.
You also, one of the nice things that we aim for with the Swadge is a good silhouette, right? Because we can see all the silk screen and stuff here, but if you're just walking down the hallway, all they're just going to see is a big jagged mess. So no big jagged messes. So the next design was Mr. Troy's over there, and he said, well, what about just a GameCube controller? He said, okay, GameCube controller is not so bad, but what if we do a Wavebird instead, because there's a little more like physical space to work with to put stuff. And I did a mock-up of just a straight Wavebird controller, which, again, a little too close to the source material, I think. But we were kind of stuck here for a while. It was kind of scratching our heads of none of these designs we really loved. They all had kind of some pros and cons. And then another guy, Justin Wood, who I don't think is here today, came in and said, he's an artist. He's not a programmer. So, by the way, we always need more artists to join the team. We'll do a thing at the end about that. But he said, well, what if we take the Wavebird but kind of make it vaguely M-shaped? And he sent the little SketchUp on the side there, which I'm sure he put together in 15 seconds because he's the kind of guy that does that. And I said, okay, like I can work with this. And then I tried to make a slightly more professional mock-up, which is the one on the other side where I'm trying to physically fit components in there. We were still playing with the idea of having a circle pad at this point, which we didn't do, but maybe next year, who knows. And then from there, Dak said, well, what about this shape? And also here's some art that I've sprinkled on it. And this was just a PNG, I think you gave me.
I work in raster.
He works in rasters. I work in vector. He works in raster.
He appropriately works in vector. That's
Yeah.
what you should be doing, but yeah.
Match made in heaven.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. We get through it. But this starts to look a lot like the shape that we ended up with. And I don't think we really changed the outline that much afterwards. We changed the art quite a bit. But I took all of that image and turned it into a circuit board in our design program, which is the thing you see on the other side. It's looking real, looking kind of professional. From there, we added the little bits on the side to protect some LEDs, and voila. That's, in a couple of different steps, how we got from dumb, boring green rectangle to the Squarewavebird that we all know and love.
And the silk screen that was done on the final version was also done by Justin Wood.
Yeah, he came back for that.
Shout outs to him. He also made a ton of like the characters that you've seen throughout the event and everything like that. Incredible artist. So like big ups to Justin.
Yeah, he is a lifesaver. All right, so now we've done everything up to getting a shape, but we got to put that in something. Well, we don't gotta, but we can this year, right? So we started Project Eggshell. Is Justin here? Yeah. All right. Well, if he shows up, we'll point him out. Justin and Emily again are CAD masters and 3D printers, and we'd never done anything like this before, and I had no idea how to do it because I'm not a mechanical engineer. But I basically told them, here's the design files. Go nuts. Like, do what you can. I can't really support you here because I don't know what I'm doing, but have fun with it. And boy, did they. They came up with this beautiful design here or there. And unfortunately, I think they're all sold out now because we just did a limited print using our own materials, but they were really popular and they're really great. So next year, hopefully, start that a little earlier, start that a little more budgety.
They were also created one at a time by who? So it was Emily and Justin.
Yeah.
Who did those.
Yep.
Yeah. And not Justin Wood.
No, different Justin.
Yeah, different Justin.
Golke, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah.
He's in the building.
Yeah, they meticulously printed all of these basically up to the very last moment, and then they sold out at the booth, I think, within an hour. But the file, I don't know if you're getting to that.
I don't think I have a slide for that, but yes, the file
Is available online. Is it on the Git?
Yeah, it's on our GitHub. So there's a URL on the back of the Swadge, which you can take to find the GitHub pages, and the GitHub pages have all the circuit board files, all the firmware files, and all the 3D print files. So
For anyone who doesn't know, the entire project is completely open source, and so one of the biggest reasons why he highlighted that it's USB driven now is that you don't need your own programmer board to actually go home and tinker with it.
yes, please tinker.
Please, honestly, and then join us, but he'll get to that.
Yeah, again, the call for help's at the very end. We're just sprinkling it in here. We're warming you up. Yeah, there we go. I did also take a couple of pictures from our Slack of just the print. I think, yeah. Because they're horrible, but I have to show the process. You know, we started from the bottom and now we're here, right? So, and if at first your print comes out looking like a Fallout mutant, you just keep on printing it again until it looks freaking awesome. And then you keep on doing it and doing it and doing it until these boxes are filled. And yeah, it was indeed a very rare drop. My note here says get them while they're hot, but unfortunately they have burned quite bright. Yeah. All right, so that's, I think, all of the mechanicals and some tooling and system stuff. So we can talk about Swadge modes here. Hooray! So the baton's going to pass a bit more for this section. We're actually going to start by mentioning Jonathan Vega, who is not here tonight. He was here yesterday, was not able to be here today, which is unfortunate. But he wrote Swadgeland, which is a platformer, like a full platformer. Power-ups, enemies, tiles, a level editor, which we had people from our community make levels for, even if they don't know anything about programming. It's kind of like if you can do Super Mario Maker, you could do this. This is another one of the ways that you can help out the team. You know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
It uses a program called Ace Sprite, and it uses the most recent beta. And JVegs actually, he like Ace Sprite is not traditionally a level editor, and he basically made it work and then output a file that he could then convert into actual levels. And it is genuinely easier than Super Mario Maker to make a level in that. And, you know, again, call for helps at the end. But if you like making levels, it's so easy to put your level on here.
Yep. And it's just it's an awesome mode. It was a great community effort. And if it was the only game on the Swadge, I think it would have been enough. Diana.
Are you gonna? I want to talk quickly about
Oh.
the 20 FPS thing, because at one
Oh,
point,
sure.
at one point, Jonathan was. He started building this at 20 FPS because anything past that, because of the way that our frame buffers, which I don't know how if you're going to get deep into that, like
Not
the
really.
magic that Charles did. Basically, Charles did like some unreasonable optimizations because he's a legend and an absolute insane person who essentially, I don't know, what's a really easy way of saying this? I don't know, tripled the rendering speed. Like, I don't know how you eliminated so much overhead, but anyway, this game was originally 20 FPS, and it felt great at 20 FPS, by the way. But then, at one point, after Charles had made some optimizations, Jonathan updated it to 60 FPS, which was not at all an easy process. He had to meticulously comb through the code and change all of his timings manually, which, like, you might think, oh, well, just, you know, multiply it or divide it by 3. You know, it didn't work like that, and he ended up making it. There were some really fundamental changes, but it almost was like taking a second pass at the gameplay, and it turned out so ridiculously good. So, gigantic ups to Jonathan on that one.
Yep. And he left a couple notes here for, I guess we can read off. What do we got? Is a game inspired by his frustrations. Can you just move your head a little bit? Thanks. A game inspired by his frustrations with lack of replay value in modern platformers. And the outdated mechanics of lives and game overs are back, but there's a combo system which makes high score chasing a little more compelling. There are achievements too, if anyone noticed. Is it even possible to get 10 million points or beat it within 25 minutes? We're not sure. It should be, but I don't think any of us actually did it. Hey. Yeah. Put that on mute. And if you just want to beat the game and not worry about the combo, there's a level selector. You can always pick up where you left off, even if you died and broke your combo. And secret mode. Secret mode?
You don't know?
I think that's just the Konami code on the platformer menu. You can.
Spoilers.
Yeah. Well, he put it there. I got to talk about it. Oh, there's your level editor.
There it is.
Yeah. You know what? I didn't realize he snuck these slides in. Well, everything we said before, but now. Yeah. Some Lua scripting. I can't see through your head.
Sorry.
Yeah, Lua scripting, kind of like Mario, but not. It's a great way to start modifying your Swadge if you want to start tinkering with something. This is indeed probably the easiest place to start tinkering. Dev environments, not too hard to set up. There are instructions online for that. And Ace Sprite is currently $20. So it's worth it. All right. Next game was Mr. Troy's game.
Big ups to Mr. Do you want to come up here?
No, he's good.
Okay.
Yep. It's called Donut Jump. It's kind of Qbert inspired. It's just like the super fun little game where you can just sit down and play it in a line, or if someone's rambling on at a panel and you don't care about them, I'm not insulted. But yeah, highly recommend. And if those two games were the only two games we had, it probably would have been enough. But this is where I pass it over to Hunter.
Hello. I need to see my notes. Oh, hi. I made Picross, which is not Picross. It's Picross. It's legally distinct. It's very different. It's a nonograms game, and yeah, it's pretty fun. I like it. I'm an assistant professor of immersive media at Chatham University, where I teach courses on game design and programming, and I do high-level studio courses and things like that. And I'm a Unity developer and a C# developer, and my background is in photography. Sure. So Dak texted me, asking me if I like C, and if I had my Labor Day weekend free, and I was like, no? Yes, fine.
Really hard text.
Yeah. That's legitimately what you texted me. So yeah, okay, I can spend a weekend making hacking together a little game. How hard could it be? I don't know C. Don't worry, there's a solution to that. You learn C. I'm a professor, I have resources, I have the ability to learn things, I have time and resources of my own time that I can dedicate. Part of my job is professional development, and I can spend time doing things like learning C, which is really great for me, but not the best advice to give all of you, because come on.
Learn it.
So I don't have any, coming from as a hacker and a C# developer, I have no secret tips. Go slow. When you hit a problem, stop, look it up, figure out what's going on, rely on the incredible community of experts and very smart people that are sitting all around me, get questions, figure out what's going on, and do it slow. So that's part one of my little anecdotes. Part two is it got good in the bad way, which meant that it got 80% good, and I was like, well, I got to get 81% good, and that took 20 more hours. And then I was like, well, if it's this good, it needs these other features, and that took another 20 hours. It's like, oh no. And these modes weren't a competition, but seeing how good the platformer was, I was like, I can't put out my hacky weekend Picross game. I have to polish this. I was really motivated by how well all the other games on the Swadge were to keep development going. And I think we all kind of lifted each other up, not just by literally helping each other, but also by competitively helping each other. And it's a really good team of smart people. And things like having the emulator and having the tools to convert the images and all that development environment made it fun. I have astigmatism. I did not know that until about 2 weeks ago. I went to the eye doctor 2 weeks ago. So all of my development, I was like, the 15 by 15 puzzles are too small. They're no good. You can't see anything. And Dak's like, I think they're fine. And I was like, no, these are too small. They're blurry. It's nothing. No, well, so. Turns out my eyes are bad. But because my eyes are bad, I added a lot of accessibility features to make it workable even at the really small levels. The blue lines, the counter, you can hit start to reset a little counter and just count how many times you tap and then read that number, the highlighting, just lots of little features, the hints, their error flashing, just everything I could think of to make it easier to play. And it is at par with a lot of feature sets of legitimately professional Picross games, and it blows all the free web games out of the water.
It's stupid good. It is really, really good.
Yeah. Cool. Your puzzles are bad though. I went to the community. I was like, design some puzzles for Picross. Let's just make it pixel art. It'll be great. And you gave them to me. Thank you all. They're bad. And because I'm a professor, and it would be rude for you to leave while I'm talking, I'm hijacking this talk and I'm giving you a lecture on how to design a good Picross puzzle. All right, so what makes a good, if you don't know what Picross puzzle is, just sit there, okay? What makes a good Picross puzzle? Picross is a detective game. It is a game about being a detective. Is it about investigation as your main verb? Is it about discovering these aha moments? How do we make aha moments? And then two, a good Picross puzzle should actually show an image. In the past, I've made a procedural Picross puzzle generation thing, and the puzzles it generated were competent and not fun to play at all. And I was like, why is that? And here, this talk is why is that? So there first are some rules you need to have a good Picross puzzle. One, it must have a single unique solution. So on the top, on the right there, those are two valid sets of block entries to get the same clues. No good. No good. Throw it in the trash. And the bottom is a more complicated example of the same thing. So how do we do that? Throw it into a tool, have it tell you if it's a solution or not. That's it. Let the computer do it for you. Rule number 2, you must be able to solve it without guessing. This is not Sudoku. No. Every clue must reveal new information that can logically be deduced, and you must be able to follow the deductions all the way through to a complete solution that reveals an image. No guessing. No holding in things. We don't have a tentative fill feature. Rule number 3, we do, you have to update the Swadge. Rule number 3, it must be Picross, Dak. We cannot have any, we got a lot of suggestions from the community, from many people, and Dak, for all sorts of fun features to add that would be not Picross. There would be variations on Picross, or Easter eggs, or fun things to hide, or stolen puzzles. That wasn't you. We can't do that. It has to adhere to the expectations that we set, and because you break that once and it's over, people will enjoy maybe that one surprise, but then they'll stop playing after that because it will lie to you. You will not have that trust. So you have to keep that alive.
Well, I think we maybe snuck one or two.
There may or may not be one.
Play through all of the puzzles for sure.
What makes a Picross puzzle good? This is a difficult question to answer, but an easy question to answer is what makes them bad. And if we can figure out some common things about what makes puzzles bad, we can pull some insight out of that and flip it around and figure out what makes puzzles good. Welcome to academia. Let hate be your motivator. I don't do that. That was my master's thesis, and 4 months of that is exhausting. Okay. Too bad. Trivially easy. Obviously bad. A couple of the puzzles I got were just too easy. Also bad. Repetitive. The same clues, the same type of solving, the same sort of mental thought process. By the time you're doing it a second or third time, it's not investigating anymore. It's a coloring book. This is not a coloring book. Someone's playing Picross. And there are other things that can be repetitive besides the clues, just sort of certain patterns that might appear. Too much starter info. When you get a Picross puzzle, the first thing you do is you look for the clues that have lots of information in them. Move your head. The second slide there is the columns. Highlighted in blue is the columns that you get for free at the start. That everyone, when you start solving puzzles, this is how you're going to start solving them once you know how to play. And for the rows are the third column. In the fourth, or the rows are the known information in the third picture. In the fourth picture is both. So by the time you finish stage 0 of the puzzle, it's basically already solved. You have yet to begin to play Picross. Not truly. And then another bad thing is symmetry. So we have the Goomba puzzle and the gazebo. Those were both submitted by community members in the Slack. And I said, great, and I threw it in the trash can because it's not good. But it's okay, come to my talk, we're here, we're learning. And on the bottom, in the middle, is a lobster puzzle that I made, and I replaced it with the Galaga bug, which you can see is basically the same puzzle, but not symmetric. And then in the top right is how I fixed the Goomba, is I just tweaked around and messed with it and raised a foot. And that's all it takes. Rotating by a little bit, by like 45 degrees, or playing with angles of the image is also helpful for getting rid of symmetry. But symmetric clues are really unfun to solve. You know what you're doing when you're solving them, you know that it's symmetric, but you can't prove it, and you're just waiting to finish filling in the blocks. Cool. So, how do we look at a puzzle and figure out if it's good or not with all this insight? Well, we can think about what the player is doing while they are solving, and we can start maybe trying to identify some of the verbs that they are using. Are they counting? Are they searching blindly for anything to appear to them? Are they looking for spaces to mark the empties, which is important when you start playing? Are they scanning? Are they copying? We can sort of imagine a bunch of different mental sort of techniques that you might be using to solve a Picross puzzle, and then I like to picture them as a pie chart. This is a mental model. This is not accurate. This is just an image to represent an idea. But like any pie chart configuration in my brain of how I am approaching a puzzle at any moment, call that a mental mode. That starter information, call that mode 1, you know. Heat maps of your attention is also another way you might think about this problem, or you might think about how you were solving a puzzle and what you were doing while you were solving a puzzle. So we can without actually labeling them. Oh my God, I put unlabeled graphs in a presentation. They're not charts, they're symbols, different techniques we can identify, some balance of different types of strategies, techniques, and thought processes, and we could say, okay, that's thought process 1, thought process 2, thought process searching, so have you. And the real insight is we want the user to change what they're doing. What I'm calling mental mode flux. We want them to switch from solving it one way to another way. If we can get them to do that, we might call lateral, as in lateral thinking, we might cause them to like shift their perspective or change the way they're thinking. That's going to lead to a satisfying player loop. So they start solving the puzzle, then we get stuck somewhere, and you're stuck and you can't continue, and you have to change how you are thinking. You have to start looking somewhere else. You have to start thinking about a different technique, a different way of finding information. And then after you have changed thinking in that way, you discover some new information, some new clue. That is the aha moment. Oh, I had to start thinking about it like this. Aha! And that feels really satisfying. When you're doing the same technique over and over again and just solving it all the way through, that just feels rote after a while. It doesn't feel satisfying. So you get new information, you follow those deductions, then you repeat. If you get stuck, switch your mental mode, get stuck again, switch your mental mode, get stuck again. That's going to make for a more difficult feeling puzzle, and ones that you have to switch less often will be a less difficult feeling puzzle. So we might begin to think of a model of difficulty, but that's not how we work. So we design the puzzles for shifts in types of thought processes, shifts in those mental modes. How can I get people to force them to think a different way in order to get from the start to the finish? Yeah, you shouldn't be able to predict your own path of solving the puzzle. That's a good test for yourself. If you're designing a puzzle, if it felt like you could predict what was going to happen, no good, throw it in the trash, kill your babies. So how do we actually do this in real life? You just got to solve your puzzles over and over again and think, that one's not fun, but I know why now. Yeah, and then you just make some changes and try again, and it's game design. You just keep playtesting until you hammer something eventually into shape. So there are some analytical tools that you can maybe draw some insight from into game design, and I hope that was helpful. Back to technical stuff. Hey.
Right, so we now have what? Platformer, Donut Jump, Picross, and if those 3 games were it, that probably would have been enough. But we kept on going. And Charles over there in the front row.
I have like 30 seconds.
Come on up then. Just have a seat.
Hello. Okay, so this is exactly the same flying thing from the Chainsaw Swadge. It took about 4 hours to port everything, add some colors, 100% worked. Also, this, if you guys haven't noticed, the VRChat portal is from the same world that is in the portal of VRChat. So Greg Lord back there actually designed it a little bit ago, so it was like, what, 3-4 years ago for the Chainsaw Swadge, and then we've been using the same map since. Real quick to port, and then 140 hours to make just a little bit better. So the big difference was the performance things that Dak had mentioned. It was just a lot of just sitting there and working at it until everything just went faster. And the answer is if you just keep working, sometimes things go 5 or 10 times faster than they did before. And then the next part was there is an update, if you guys are aware, there is update at InfoDesk and at VR Zone that will let you do PvP mode. So if you do the flight sim, and the second option down is PvP free play. If you're near somebody else with a Swadge and you start shoot, or like go ahead, you can blow each other up, and hopefully a little bit later today, if you're in front of a VRChat portal, you can actually fly around and see the people in VRChat, and they have banana guns that they can shoot back at you. So get an update and come to the VRChat portal, and we're trying to do it by the atrium late tonight. Yes, Greg? Oh, no, nothing? Okay, thanks.
So one more game, and if that was it, it would have been enough, yada, yada, whatever. Moving on to the next. It's your turn.
Great. Can I get with my... I'm working heavily off of my notes. Right. So, Tiltrad's color. You might recognize Tiltrad's from the barrel Swadge. I guess that would have been 2 years ago at this. Point. The impetus behind the original or rather, I wanted to talk about like porting a Swadge mode versus developing one. The plan was to kind of quickly port Tiltrads to the barrel Swadge, from the barrel Swadge to the Squarewavebird, to just add more to the playable modes, and then get to work on my actual mode. And then the reality is that complications in sort of other areas of my life removed most of my bandwidth for that. I'm not going to talk about the mode that I was hoping to make, because I'm hoping that maybe next year I'll be talking about that mode. But I was able to complete the port. The plus side is that I had more time to drill down on the port and make sure that it was kind of fully fleshed out rather than just the quickest thing that I could hammer out. And because the full other mode kind of fell out of scope for me. And the port was a success, but I kind of fell short of my own expectations. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think it's important to evaluate failures like that and as developers to be able to speak openly about them, even if it's not always pleasant. Which I will wrap back around to the hopeful version of that in a minute. So what worked with the port? The gameplay code from the very beginning on the barrel Swadge, I was very intentional about separating it from the drawing code as much as possible. So that was basically unchanged. The only things that had to change were mainly draw functions to hook into the new way that things were rendered. So things for like and even then, the fact is that I didn't use sprites for the original Tiltrads. I was just using the drawing functions for lines and rects and constructing patterns off of that. So I didn't have to change the way that the sprites were rendered from the barrel to forward to the Squarewave. So it was a pretty simple port for the drawing. The increased number of buttons opened up a number of possibilities for additional functions that kind of improved gameplay without, my hope was, sacrificing intent. Like the easiest thing to do would have been to just port the original functionality. A couple early notes that I got were sort of on the most obvious change you might think, which is just adding the directional buttons to move the tetrads or tetrominoes instead of the tilt controls. And I was really resistant to this because the original Tiltrads was, by function of the limited buttons, meant to be motion controlled kind of Tetris. And I didn't want to just do a Tetris port straight up. I wanted to preserve that idea of Tiltrads. So it's in the name. So credit to Dak for his suggestion of the current controls. It took advantage of more of the button space, and I can't.
Left, right arrows.
I want to scroll down on the speaker notes. Oh, okay. How do I?
Two finger.
Oh.
The mouse go.
Yeah, the mouse has disappeared. Okay, there we go. All right, great. So suggestion of the current controls, it took advantage of the new buttons while preserving kind of my original intent. I was also very pleased at how easily it was for me to get the hard drops and the bidirectional rotation in. That was like a minute where I was like, good job, past me. You did this well. Point 3, the addition of color and the increased display size opened up the potential for new visual effects. Whenever I personally am looking at what kinds of visual effects that I add, I always try to go for polish that communicates something. So in this case, I would flash briefly the fill and border colors of the Tiltrad when it locks into place. Those are the visual effects that I think add something, the things where the player gets a little bit more information as opposed to just an explosion when something happens, just because it's like, that's so much, it gets to be confetti, it's not effective in my opinion. And the increased screen size actually also facilitated for a larger Tetrads grid, which is closer to sort of standard Tetris. So actually closer to kind of what you would expect. So what didn't work at first? A lot of the UI code was optimized specifically for the barrel Swadge screen, and so everything on the larger screen rendered out of place. I actually did the brunt of the first port kind of in a weekend, also at the Gaylord at a different convention that took place earlier this year. I was working for some friends in their artist alley, and we had a lot of free time. But an example of kind of we had to squeeze every possible optimization we could out of the barrel Swadge. So one of the ways that I had to draw centered text, the only way I could get that is I wanted the text width so that I could do the calculation. It would only give me that if I drew the text. So I would draw the center text by drawing the text in inverse draw mode. So the old Swadge screen had black and white, and you could draw inverse, which would just invert if the color that was being drawn to was black, it would draw white, and vice versa. So I would draw it inverse to get its width when rendered, then redraw it in inverse to hide it, and then draw the final text in the final location. Those of you who are looking at me with puzzled looks are like, but you just said optimize as much as possible, and you just described drawing text 3 times. You're right, that's stupid. Code that runs in a frame has to be super optimized. Code that has to run once at startup can be a little unoptimized. And code that has to run once before the user ever runs the game can be as unoptimized as you want. So basically, I just ran these functions once in test mode to get the correct values, stole them, and then constanted them. And that's the reason that when we upgraded the size, everything was out of place, because everything was just hard-coded because I was fast. Basically, reusing that function to refine the correct anchors to get everything in place. And then, let me see.
Mouse again.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, uh-oh. All right, hold on, sorry about that. All right. So, point 2, there was a kind of a tricky bug that I saw after adding hard drop tetrads near the top of the screen. You remember earlier I said I was so pleased at how easy it was to do. And then I started running into this weird bug that happened just often enough that I wasn't sure if I was just seeing things. It was specifically when hard dropping several tetrads once the screen was nearly full, there were scenarios where it appeared that a tetrad was colliding with thin air and the game was ending as a result. And obviously, if you ever ran into this bug as a player, it would look very frustrating because it would look like the game was just bugged, obviously bugged. So I was able to find an easy reproducible test case and added debug prints for the grid below the rendering, and discovered that the actual bug was that a tetrad was hard dropping in a single frame, and before it could render at the end of that frame, the next tetrad was spawning in, colliding with it in a way that was ending the game. So it was rendering the game over tetrad before getting through to the rest of the frame to render the rest of the tiltrad. And because we were optimizing as much as possible on the barrel Swadge, when we got to game over mode, we just render the window over the screen behind it. We don't bother finishing the game frame because it doesn't matter. So it was an easy fix to just get that invisible tetrad rendering correctly. So the tetrad fill and draw patterns worked, but they're not too different from what they were originally. I was kind of hoping for some time to drill down on them and make it a little more visually interesting, but at a certain point I was kind of doing triage on what the most effective use of my time was, and I thought this is going to take time and I don't have a lot of time and I'm increasingly running out of time. And lastly, sort of a bug that I wrote in the code for the original tiltrads 2 years ago ended up causing Adam some unexpected trouble. So let me explain that. Adam fights my ghost for the fate of projectiles in the fighter mode. So flashback to 2019, I'm working on tiltrads for the 2020 barrel Swadge. Tiltrads require data structures of variable length for tracking certain things in gameplay. Like keeping track of landed tetrads and generating upcoming tetrad types. So I implemented a simple linked list, single C file and a header just to satisfy this need. Worked super fine in the original tiltrads. For those that are true programmers and or data structures nerds, technically a doubly linked list to sidebar. A linked list consists of nodes where each node contains a data field and also a reference to the next node in the list as well. It's doubly linked because it also has a reference to the previous node. And so the thing is that it was a functionally simple but effective implementation, and so I think Adam carried it forward into future Swadge modes. It just made its way into the code base under the utils folder, which is great. Other people might find it useful. So the problem, late 2022, Adam begins using the linked list for projectiles in the fighter mode, and strange things happen. Specifically, what Adam figured out is if you were trying to remove a data item that is the second node in the list, it fails. So sidebar back to how I tend to approach writing functions. You handle any special cases, i.e. if something is the first node or the last node and you're trying to remove it, you have to do some different things. You have to update the first or the last pointer. And then I handle the general case. And so the general case for removing an item by index iterated to the node before the target node to update the previous and next pointers for all the nodes that it was touching. And this was written a little strangely, but it worked fine. But the general case for removing an item by value, so instead of trying to remove based on the index that it was at in the list, but removing like a given value that you supplied it, didn't work because it was checking values as it was iterating, meaning it was skipping the second item in the list after handling the general case for the first node. So there was a bit of a shocking twist. So there were two functions for removing from the linked list, by index or by value. Tiltrads only ever used the remove by index, and the bug was in the by value function. The removal by value function wasn't in the 2019 version of the file. It was added for the 2022 Swadge by someone else. Something that I figured out while I was writing these slides. So anyways, ultimately, because I'd spent it just like, man, I can't believe I made that mistake, and then it's like, oh yeah, well, whatever. It's just, ultimately, I think it's helpful to acknowledge, but not dwell on mistakes like this. Like, my hope is that people understand that if we're up here and, making mistakes like this, but still making cool stuff like this, that you shouldn't be afraid to join us, which I think Adam loops back around to in a little bit. So that's it for me.
All right, and I saw the 10-minute time card flash, so we're going to turn on turbo mode for the end of this one. Hold on to your butts. All right, other mode, gamepad mode. You can plug this into your computer and use it as a gamepad. Use it with your favorite emulators. You can also plug it into a Nintendo Switch and use it. It doesn't quite have all the buttons for all the games, but simple games work. So feel free to go challenge yourself to play better games with a worse controller. Works on Steam Deck too. Yep. All right, other mode, light dances. These are just the LEDs that you see everyone flashing when you walk around. These were ported by Dylan Witchard and Bryce Browner. It was great. Went from 6 LEDs to 8 LEDs. That was the only real polish. And then I did some low power optimizations. So the last test I did, I think I got about 70 hours of battery life out of it just idling on LEDs. So hopefully the batteries last you for all of MAGFest. Next mode, MF Paint. It stands for MAGFest Paint for all you out there. Dylan wrote this mode. It's a full paint thing. Hunter made a reference before about Picross not being paint, but it's there. You can make art, and it's awesome. My personal favorite thing about it is the tutorial. If you haven't done the tutorial, do it. It holds your hand so perfectly and teaches you how to use something that's complex but crammed down, and you can make a smiley face. Gavin Granith is a guy who came around and there's Luigi in the back there. He said, I want to roll some dice. I said, cool, do it. And you know what? He did it. So now you can roll some dice. It's got a little history on the side. You can pick the number of dice and the number of faces on the dice and go play some D&D or whatever. Color chord, another mode from Swadge's past. So you'll see it at concerts. They're playing music. The Swadges are bopping along to the color. I think the only real updates we did here was this display. It gets a nice little histogram. Tuner Gnome, another one that came back. Bryce did most of the work on that one. You can tune your instruments with it, and you can also keep time with it. So for all you musicians out there, that's for you. We had another returning mode, affectionately called Techno Slide Whistle, which is kind of like a synthesizer. It uses the same tilty stuff as Tiltrads, but instead of dropping blocks, you're making music. It was originally on the Barrel Swadge, and it was pretty quick and easy to move it over here with a little extra polish. A lot of the games we had also had music, and we said, well, you have to play the game to listen to the music, but what if you just want to listen to the music? So Bryce and Ellie made a jukebox, so you can listen to your favorite tunes in there without having to, play games or whatever. All right, and then the final one, which was my own mode, which we have less than 5 minutes to go through, is Super Swadge Bros. Great, 4 minutes. So this is going to be real fast. I took a bunch of GIFs along the way as progress. So you can kind of see how the game gets built up from nothing to something. So the first thing we start with is just boxes jumping around. And it actually took me quite a long time to get here, just to get the physics feeling right and get collisions right and get it rendering fast enough, but we got there. After that, we need some sprites. So we have some wonderful artists. Katie was here, I guess she left, but Katie, Allie, Hex, and Greg, again in the back, wonderful sprite artists. You ask them for sprites, they make you sprites. I pasted them over the rectangles, and now we have King Donut jumping around. All right, but forget the sprites. We need to actually go back to engine stuff. So at this point, we can add whether a fighter is facing left or the right, because previously it was just a box, and also a little framework for attack. So each attack has 3 states: wind up, hit, cooldown, and then within the hit phase, you can have multiple hitboxes around. So there's all that's written in JSON. I actually had Dak, who was here before, tune a lot of that stuff. He doesn't know how to program for anything, but he can work with a JSON file, which is great. Platforms also have different characteristics. Some you can fall through, some you cannot, so we had to add that. You also have to add jumping up through platforms, can't just go down, and also projectiles, because it's not fun if you can't shoot. This is where I found the bug that we talked about previously. Oh, right, sprites are back here. So now we actually have a framework for sprites that assigns different sprites to different attack states or movement states. That's all tied together in that JSON as well and all loaded dynamically. Initially, I thought I was going to write this JSON file and then hard-code it when it was all done, but it turns out the JSON was fast enough, so we just left it in there. All right, more movement states, running, ducking, and jumping. I didn't ask for sprites for these. I made these myself because it turns out you can do some real dumb stuff with MS Paint with stretching and skewing, but you can run, duck, and jump now. I took a brief break to write a menu because it turns out every game needs a menu. And this was originally just going to be for the fighter, but everyone liked it, so now it was flexible. So a lot of modes used it. Hooray, menus. All right, back to movement. We can short hop now because you want to have movement options to attack your opponent from different places. So you can jump tall, you can jump short. But if you're attacking, you also need damage, which had not been done up to here. So now when your attacks connect, you get a single % of damage. It's a real slow game. Also, there's no knockback, but knockback is next because if you're hitting someone, there has to be an action and a reaction. So now we have damage and knockback. We also need triple jumps for recovery off stage. So jump once, jump twice, easy. The third one is usually an attack jump type thing. So it's actually the attack state has a little modifier for your velocity vector. It'll just give you a little boost along the way. We also did multi-hitboxes at this point. Previously it was one attack, one hitbox, and then we made it more flexible. All right, landing lag, ducking through platforms. If you jump and you land, you can't immediately jump again. The game would be too fast and kind of broken, so there's a period you have to wait. You can also duck through platforms as opposed to double tapping. That was just a usability thing that came up. All right, stocks, hadn't gotten there yet. If you fall to the platform before, nothing would happen. You just fall for infinity. Now you actually die and respawn, and there's a little stock counter. It's starting to feel like a real game or something. Hit stun, that's also very important for a Smash-style game. If you hit someone, they should not be able to hit you back immediately. This is how you can string together combos or juggle people or anything like that. So I had to add that. Ledge hopping and invincibility. Invincibility goes without saying. You spawn, you have a couple of iframes, not to make it too cheap. Ledge hopping was interesting because there's no grabbing of the ledge in this game, so there was a lot of really feels bad moments when you'd be trying to recover and you'd hit the sidewall and just fall to your death. So what we did is, if you hit the sidewall and you're all out of jumps, you get like a little extra hop boost thing. It's not quite a ledge grab, but it'll get you back and it feels pretty good, I think. All right, back to the menu. This is actually decided to tie the menu into the game this time and have like functional menu items, and also added a home run contest because you want to play the game in single player mode, and writing a CPU I thought was hard, and I did that later, but we're getting there. So we have this little home run contest now. The sandbag was supposed to be a placeholder, but it was never replaced, so that's the final sandbag. All right, but if you have this kind of game, you got to fight against people. The ESPs can have wireless peer-to-peer connection, so we built that in. The first step was just getting them to connect, which is a really boring GIF, but it's two emulators talking to each other over UDP. There was a lot of optimization that had to go in for the networking code, and it kind of almost works at the Gaylord. It works way better in my apartment where there's less random RF interference. But you can also connect two Swadge with a USB-C to C cable, and they will fight over the cable, which is way more reliable. Yep. after connection, then you write your netcode. This is basically one Swadge tells its button presses to the other Swadge gives it a scene description back. So it's not sending the full image, it's saying draw sprite here, here, and here. So they're both rendering in real time, handling buttons in real time. Yeah, had a lot of rewriting to get that to work, but it mostly does. All right, back to moving, bouncing. If you hit someone into the floor really hard, they should bounce up. That's that whole action-reaction thing. Again, there's certain expectations players have with these kinds of games. So now you hit things down, they bounce up. You can combo them that way. Hit, stop, and barriers. Hit, stop is another, it's kind of harder to describe. When you hit someone with a really strong attack, it almost freezes for a little bit. You don't notice it playing Smash, but it makes attacks feel heavy. It feels like something really connected. So we added that. And we added some barriers so you can bounce around the sandbag without immediately whacking it off the side and getting a very low score. More home run contest improvements. It's basically a real game now. The timer counts in. There's a little thing that says go. Yeah, fun stuff. And then we added records because you need to know, how you're improving over time, and also a background. I had mentioned way earlier we had 2 megabytes of spy RAM, and it turns out this is where you can load really large images. So we just jammed the whole image in there, threw it in the frame buffer, and by goodness, it's not black back there anymore. Multiplayer results also we had to add. So when you're playing with your friends, you'll know who's better and who's worse, and then you can rub it in their faces or get it rubbed in your face. At this point, sprites are really coming along. I think the King Donut sprites were pretty much done at this point. I also added a panning camera, which we didn't have previously, which adds more interesting off-ledge play. But the camera panning code actually sucks in this GIF. I ended up revamping it afterwards. Really interesting academic stuff. There's like articles and articles written about 2D platformer camera controls, which I never knew were out there and spent a whole night reading up on. This was yep, there it goes. And then I wrote a CPU player because I wanted to see how hard it was, and it turns out it's not as hard as I thought it was. It took about 2 days of not touching grass, and suddenly we had a CPU player. And the other really nice thing is if you put 2 CPU players next to each other, they just fight, and you can watch it and you can sit back and be like, they're both kind of better than me, but whatever. Although you can cheese them if you figure out how. They're not super, super great. And what's next? So that was pretty much it. That was like the end of it. There were some LED effects, there were some sound effects, and that's the game in 26 GIFs. Whew. Yep. We're going to skip the manufacturer stuff. We send them money and design files. They send up spec Swadges. It works out pretty well. They also send us some progress stuff. No, we skip. There we go. All right, and I don't think we have that much time left, but whatever time we do have left, please contact us. We're not hard to get a hold of. The URL's on the back of the Swadge. Help us out. We can always use programmers, artists, testers, ideas people, whatever. Let us know. We've got space. We don't bite hard. All right. Who's got questions for the time we have left? Don't all jump up at once. So. Yep. I am not planning on putting out any more updates to this Swadge. I think we're all going to go into hibernation for a couple of weeks and then maybe start thinking about next year's afterwards. However, if you want to make any modifications in a GitHub fork, you're more than welcome to, and you can share them with the world.
Has there been any thought into making a reusable Swadge, something that we could essentially like reprogram every year and bring back over and over?
Yeah, there's thoughts about a reusable Swadge. Yes and no. So every year we try to do something a little different with the hardware, which somewhat precludes it from reusability. So I mentioned that we had that circular touchpad that we were playing around with earlier that didn't get put on this one. We have a little touch strip. But next year, I think that's one of the things that I'd like to do more, which would make this Swadge, coming back, it's a little harder to do.
Is it possible to 3D print a covering for the D-pad?
It's possible to 3D print a covering for the D-pad if you design something for the D-pad. So the only files we have currently are the eggshell files, but all of the everything design files are on there. So if you can do CAD and measurement and print out stuff,
and if you do, send it to us.
Oh yeah, I want to see and hear everything you guys do. Circuitboards@magfest.org, or hit me up on Discord, I guess.
I have a similar point. I was curious about similar shell, but for some of the older ones, like the.
Yeah, the reflector Swadge.
Would I be able to just get, or do you have the source files for these out there as well?
Yeah, the source files are out there as well. They're a little bit harder to find because that was, I think, the year before we started centralizing a bunch of stuff. But again, if you email circuitboards@magfest.org and ask for it, I'll be able to hook you up. First row, and then the hat behind him.
Does it have BLE on it?
It does not have BLE. Sorry. Some of the ESP processors do and some don't, and we picked one that didn't because we weren't using it. Right.
For someone who doesn't know how to program, how does the CPU know what to do? Does it get hints from like the program, like where the other player is? Like how does it find its target?
Oh, for the wireless thing specifically?
For the fighting game?
Yeah. So what happens is there's a little handshaking protocol. So when you put it in pairing mode, each one will start sending broadcasts periodically and also listening for broadcasts. And if you hear someone else's, the CPU will reply to it, and vice versa. And once both sides acknowledge each other, it gets on with the show. It also has to have a certain signal strength to acknowledge it, which is how if you have a whole room full of them, they'll only pair the ones that are like physically close to each other. Hopefully. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands, and I think we're on time. So thank you for all coming out.